Witch Hunt, A Tale of the Occult by Lee Bishop. The 73 Nova came to a stop at the crossroads. The man behind the wheel looked at the signpost. Salisbury, Maryland, 3 miles straight ahead, it said. He looked over in the seat at the seemingly random pile of computer printouts, newspapers, maps, and the laptop resting there. He wondered again how no one else had put all the signs together. Deformed births, all the milk in town spoiling overnight, portents, omens, even the weather. Salisbury had more lightning storms in the last month than in the last 3 years combined. It all pointed to one thing: witchcraft. Not the sort college girls dabbling in Wicca did on Friday nights before they made out. No, this was the real kind, as far from New Age thinking as it could get. This was the old, ancient, and powerful sort, and it was going down here. He snapped out of it, shaking his head. He'd been staring at the pile of information, bits and pieces of it flashing through his mind, along with memories of dozens of hunts before this one. He rubbed his eyes and slapped himself across the face, trying to wake up. He took a knock from the flask in his jacket and winced as the whiskey burned its way down his chest to spread warm into his stomach. He replaced the flask and fixed his gaze straight ahead. Letting out the clutch, the car's engine emitted a low, deep rumble as he eased it through the crossroads and headed the last few miles into town. The sun was setting as he entered Salisbury, and the streets were quiet. He saw few of the locals about, but did not think it strange. This was small-town America, when kids came in from their play to wash their faces and have some pie before bed, where people sat of an evening having a cold beer or soda on the porch once the day was done. Everything in a small town slowed down at night. The thought made him smile. It was not often he got to work in such a nice little town as this. Mostly the things he hunted stayed in out-of-the-way, rust-belt towns in the Midwest. Easier to stay hidden when no one wanted to come to your hiding place, and everyone there only dreamed of leaving. He cruised through town, his car drawing looks from the townies as he drove by. The jet-black Nova slid through the darkened streets like some sort of nocturnal predator, its low rumbling idle daring any other cars to challenge its might. He loved his car and made no apologies about it. It had saved his life more times than he could count. He navigated through the quiet, darkened streets looking for the inn he had reservations at. It took him little time to make his way there. He had learned the town as well as he could from maps before his journey. He found it on Sycamore Street, right in the middle of town. It was an old place dating back to the days of the Civil War. The building was made of brown stone, moderately sized by today's standards. It had only 15 rooms, but the innkeeper on the phone told him they had few guests this time of year. He would be the only one staying there this weekend. He pulled the Nova into the lot, parking in front of the main doors. He stepped out of the car, allowing a moment to stretch his legs after the long drive from Wichita. He walked up to the doors of the old Murphy Inn and entered the lobby. It was very tastefully decorated, with lots of antique furniture, old photographs, and even some Civil War artifacts on display in the illuminated glass cases near the desk. He stepped to the check-in counter and saw no one behind it. He rang the bell there only once, and a kindly-looking old fellow came walking out of a small room to the left, the sounds of Wheel of Fortune escaping the door. He was dressed simply, old blue jeans, a white-collared shirt with a missing button, and some fraying around the cuffs, and black suspenders. His glasses, of the sort he associated with the stork on the pickle jar, resting halfway down his narrow nose, glinted when the man raised his head to peer through them. He smiled easily enough as he spoke. "Can I help you, young man?" he said as he laid his hands in a friendly but businesslike way on the counter to either side of the guest register. The hunter smiled as he extended his hand to the kindly old fellow. "Nathan Crow. I had a reservation. You must be Mr. Merriweather. I believe we spoke on the phone, sir," the hunter said as the old man shook with him. The old fellow smiled larger at the introduction. "Oh, yes, welcome, Mr. Crow. I'm sorry to be so remiss. This old bean of mine isn't the steel trap it used to be. Always glad to have guests in my old place here. You drive in okay, son?" he asked as he began pulling out the forms he had prepared for Crow's signature. Crow rolled his head slightly, stretching his neck. The cracks from the vertebrae were loud in the near silence of the lobby. "Yeah, it was fine, just too damn long. Kansas seems a lot further away driving than it looks on a map. I like your place here, Mr. Merriweather. Very elegant. Nice displays, beautiful furniture. I don't see why you have so little business." Small talk wasn't Nathan's strong point, and he hoped the old man wasn't of a mind to talk his ear off. Nathan took the papers he slid over the counter and signed on the X's. "Well, thank you, son. I very much appreciate that. Mayhap we can talk a little more tomorrow, but I can see you're tired. And to be honest, wheel is on. Why don't you go on up to your room and get some rest, and I'll see you down at breakfast. I cooked for all the guests, and I'll have something on the table for you around 8 in the morning, if that does you fine. That would do Nathan splendidly. He hadn't had a home-cooked Yankee breakfast in years. You got it, Mr. Merriweather. I'll see you then. Thanks for the warm welcome. Nathan shook the old man's hand once again and took his key. Room 5, it said on the tag of the old-style skeleton key. The man smiled again. You're very welcome, son, and call me Sam, would you? I've never been so formal with anyone on my own account ever in my life. Crow nodded and turned to walk away. He slipped out the door and back into his car. He started the Nova, its engine roaring to life again, and the familiar rumble sent waves of intimidating noise into the cool autumn night. He pulled the car into space just to the right of the main entrance and began to gather his things. He had only 2 bags and all his research from the front seat. Crow carried it all into the building and had a little trouble locating his room on the first floor. He set his things on the bed and his research on the decent-sized table. He made sure the door was locked and began to strip off his clothes. His scars stood out pale against the tan of his skin. The muscled texture of his torso was covered with them. Strings amongst them were a pair of scars on either side of his rib cage. They looked like nothing so much as handprints, those had come from a mix-up with a demon some years ago. He had been practically a boy back then. Along with the scars on his chest, back, and arms were several tattoos. They were of odd sorts, each one a sigil or a ward against some sort of supernatural attack. Some warded off possession, others were minor protection from hexes. The 2 on his forearms were shielding wards designed to deflect some sorts of magical attacks. Even though he was only 30, he had been hunting for a long time. He had the look of a man of 45, the long years on the road and hard living taking their toll. His dark black hair was already going gray in places, and his face, though handsome, was already showing deep lines. When he wore his long hair back, you could see he was missing his left ear. Only a lump of scar tissue and a hole remained there. He stripped the rest of the way down and turned on the shower. The steam from the hot water soon filled the small bathroom, and only at this point did he climb into the shower to wash off the smell of the road. Afterward, he dried off and dressed in fresh clothes. He always dressed simply: jeans, a loose-collared shirt, his boots, and his trusted old friend of a black leather coat. The coat was not so long as a trench. It came down to his thigh. It was, however, long enough to conceal his standard load-out of knives, silver and iron chains, salt capsules, and a pistol for more mundane threats. He carried a small satchel full of all sorts of odds and ends, mostly components for quick and dirty protection rituals. It was still early, only around 9:30 in the evening, and he wanted a drink. So he rigged his door with a shotgun trap, put the Do Not Disturb sign on the handle, and headed back to his car. As he passed the desk in the lobby, he called to Sam, asking where the closest bar was. The man answered from his little room, the TV now showing Jeopardy, and said there was one close enough. Just down the street it was, McGinty's Pub. Crow left the Murphy and decided to just walk the few blocks to the pub. The Nova would be safe enough parked behind the short wall surrounding the inn. He headed down the sidewalk in an easy stroll, taking in the atmosphere of Salzburg. It was quiet here, not the sort of place one would ever expect to look for true evil. Crow knew that looks could be deceiving, however. All his research pointed to this place. Something bad was happening in this quiet, peaceful little town. He reached the pub without incident, however, the quiet streets easing him into a sort of relaxation. The bar was just the sort of thing he would expect in this town. Around 30 or so people crowded into the small pub, some women on the arms of their men, some drinking alone. A few women were at the bar wearing revealing dresses, trying way too hard to be noticed. Crow took an empty stool at the end of the bar and ordered a whiskey, neat. He drained the 2-finger glass at once and asked for a double. He sipped this one a bit slower, letting the rock music coming from the jukebox in the corner wash over him. A couple of the boys at a table a few feet away were looking over at him, snickering to the girls with them. Crow hoped they weren't stupid enough to start trouble, but soon enough found his hopes futile. He caught sight of them coming his way in the mirror behind the bar, their posture that of boys trying to prove themselves men. The cute bartender was back to him as he drained his glass again and set it upside down on the bar. "Anything else, handsome?" She was smiling at him. He sighed as he answered. "Better call an ambulance. Now," he replied as he cracked his knuckles and popped his neck. He knew how this was going to go. The bartender saw the 2 boys approaching him and rolled her eyes. She backed off and moved over toward the phone and tried to flag down a bouncer. The boys had reached his back, and one tapped him on the shoulder, more than a bit roughly. He turned his head half round as the first one spoke. "Nice purse, mister. Did you get that at Saks or the thrift store?" His friend laughed. Crow turned back to the bar and said nothing. He just slid his glass back and forth between his hands on the bar. "Hey, faggot, I'm talking to you. Don't turn your back on—" Crow cut him off in mid-sentence. He turned his head once again, keeping one eye focused on the mirror, the other on the door. Walk away, boys. I'm only going to tell you once. Go back to your girls over there while you still have the legs to carry you, he said in a very calm and steady voice. The boisterous one looked at his friend, who only smirked at him. Feeling his masculinity challenged, he grabbed Crow's shoulder and started to say something. He never got the chance to speak. Crow moved fast. The quiet one saw only a blur, and his buddy with the big mouth was on his back, cradling his arm. The sound of the bones snapping only registered to those nearby, for the young fool was already floored and screaming. Crow looked at his friend, who was backing up. Don't try it, son. I've given you fair warning, he said as he stared at him unblinking. The boy reached into the waistband of his jeans and produced a knife. Fuck you, pal. You just broke my buddy's arm. Your ass is mine, he screamed as he lunged at Crow. It was over fast. Crow caught the boy's hand and reached his arm around, separating the shoulder, and used the knife to pin his hand to the bar. Blood was squirting up from his hand and running down the bar. People were backing off and screaming. Crow just shook his head. He dropped $20 on the bar, right in the pooling blood, and looked at the frightened bartender. Sorry for the trouble, honey. Get these two morons some medical attention. I'll be leaving now, he said to her and nodded. He walked slowly out of the bar. No one tried to stop him. The cold autumn air hit his face as he stepped out into the night. He shook his head again and turned back toward the inn. He couldn't even get a fucking drink these days. He was tired as hell, and not just from the drive. It seemed everywhere he went he had a "Please fuck with me" sign taped to his back. He walked up the sidewalk the way he came, lost in thought, when someone collided with him. He had drawn back a fist, and he realized the attacker was a frightened-looking young woman. She had blonde hair and blue eyes, very pretty and not a day over 20 if you could judge from her face. She was panicked, damn near hysterical. He took her by the shoulder and held her still. Hey, lady, what's wrong? You all right? He asked. She just kept trying to break away and run. Crow slapped her across the face. Not hard, but hard enough to snap her out of this fit of hysterics. She looked at him, shocked and a little hurt. Sorry about that, but you look like you just saw the devil, honey. What the hell are you running from? He was looking her right in the eye. These women, they want to kill me. Please help me, please, please, please. They're coming. We have to run. They'll kill us both, she was screaming. Crow was now very interested. He looked the way she had come, back down a side alley. There, coming through the fog, rising from a sewer grate, he saw 5 figures emerging. They were all distinctly female. As they cleared the fog, moving in a slow, measured saunter, he could make out a couple of brunettes, a blonde, a redhead, and one who looked either black or maybe Latino. The one in the middle, she moved like some sort of seductress, her every motion suggesting sex. The blonde was a crazed looking. The redhead looked all business. The other brunette, she looked Italian, wore this look of contempt mixed with disdain. The last, the dark-skinned one, had bones woven into her hair, and her teeth were rotten. All his internal alarms were blaring, an interior cacophony of warning klaxons beating at his brain to either run or fight. The one in the center spoke. Okay, big fella, that little filly is mine. Be a good boy and hand her over, she said as she licked her full red lips. She had stopped the group about 20 feet from where Crow stood with the girl. She ran a hand down her side to her leg, which was showing through the slit in her black form-fitting dress. Her other hand was trailing under her cleavage. She had this come-hither look that would have made most men come running. The blonde was seething with anger. She glared at Crow. She spoke. Let me kill him, Sasha. I want to make a few necklaces from his bones and sew his flesh into a coat. I bet he'd keep me warm the rest of the winter, she said, then laughed. The one in the middle, Sasha apparently, held up her hand. The redhead stepped forward. I'm tired of this already. Fuck this guy. Let's just take her, she said as she raised her hand. Crow shoved the girl behind him and drew one of his knives. The silver blade did not gleam in the moonlight. It was covered with a reddish-black crust. He threw it at the redhead as she moved to the side. The direct shot to the heart found her arm instead. He smiled when he heard her yelp with pain and saw the smoke rise from her wound. She was thrashing around into the walls of the alley, but soon removed the blade. Seems like I don't have to go looking. You found me. Let's dance, ladies, Crow said as he reached into his coat again. The redhead had recovered now and was chanting something. Crow had just closed his hand around the handle of another knife when he felt the muscles in his arm begin to shrink in on themselves. The pain was intense, and he felt his strength draining. Cursing, he let go of the knife and dug into his bag. He found 2 pennies which had once covered the eyes of a hanged man, and placed them in his mouth under his tongue. The pain at once began to abate, and the withering reversed. The redhead cursed at him and, was that Gaelic? And began to run toward him. They all did. He popped a salt pack and quickly flung it across the mouth of the alley. He then grabbed the girl and bolted down the street. The women hit the salt line and came to a halt as if hitting a force field. He heard their screams of frustration as they ran. He was dragging the girl along with him as he made for the inn. They reached the building, and he threw her into the lobby and locked the doors behind him. He laid down another salt line at the door and grabbed the girl by the arm. "Move if you want to live, woman," he said to her. She moved. They went down the hall, and he paused at the door to his room. He opened it slightly, reaching in to disarm the shotgun he had rigged there. Once it was taken care of, he flung the door open and shoved the girl inside, following her quickly. He slammed the door closed and ran the bolt. Once locked inside, he placed salt lines to the door and all the windows and drew down the blinds. The girl just lay on the bed, sobbing quietly as he worked. When it was done, he sat down at the table and spat the 2 pennies onto the surface. They had turned black as if burned in a fire. He looked at his arm. The muscles were healing already. That was good. She had not had time to finish the curse. Only then did he turn to the girl. "What's your name?" he asked her. She just looked up at him through her hair, which had fallen in front of her face. He leaned over the table. Lady, who are you, and what do those witches want with you? Talk to me, damn it. I'm the only person who can help you right now." Crow stared at her intently. Victoria Allison, that's my name," she said, as she finally fought back the sobs. She was wiping at her nose with her hand, and Crow passed her a tissue from the box Sam had thoughtfully stocked his room with. "Those women wanted me for something. You said they're witches? Like Wiccans? I've never seen Wiccans do anything like that." She was getting sidetracked. "No, not like Wiccans. Wiccans are harmless, mostly college girls on a New Age kick. Those bitches back there, they are the real deal. Curses, hexes, spells, the whole 9 yards. Dead babies, magic cats and birds, plagues, famine, zombies, all that shit. The old world kind of witch, the ones people like me have been hunting down for hundreds of years. What do they want with you?" "I think they wanted me for some kind of ceremony. I've been sleeping with one of them, Sharon. She's the redhead. Not anything serious, just kind of experimenting. I'm more into men, you understand. Anyway, she finally asked me to come to her place, and when I got there, the rest of them were waiting on me. They knocked me out and put me in some sort of old wooden cage in their basement. I heard them talking about the ritual, how it was perfect. I got scared, so when they all went out for dinner, I managed to get out. One of the bars in that cage was loose, and I slipped out. I grabbed this when I ran. It looked important." She slipped a small leather-bound book out of her jeans and handed it to Crow. He turned the book over in his hands. The cover was plain black leather with no writing of any sort on the cover or the spine. He opened it to the first page and recognized a grimoire. The spells in it were straightforward up until the end. The last few were heavy-duty shit. Summoning circles, incantations, recipes for potions, and more than a few curses. The last few pages which had been filled made his stomach knot. It was like nothing he had ever seen. The spell was a summoning ritual, but not for a demon, ghost, or any sort of familiar he had ever seen. It was very complex and called for a human sacrifice. A young girl. He shut the book and slipped it into his bag. "Victoria, you were lucky you ran across me. These women meant to sacrifice you. They were going to use you to summon something very dark. Did you hear them mention what it was?" he asked her. She was starting to calm down and seemed to think hard on his question. "Some old god, they said. I can't remember the name. It was weird, not like any other name I've ever heard before. I don't think I could pronounce it. Look, mister, I'm grateful to you for saving me, and I think I should leave town before they find me," she said as she began to stand up. Crow caught her arm and set her back down on the bed. "I'm sorry, but I need you. You have to take me to their house. I can't let them live any longer than necessary. If they're trying to summon an old god, it could mean the end of everything. These things are horrors. I've only ever heard of them in legend. I didn't even think they were real. But if they're going to all this trouble, I can't risk it. I have to stop them. I know how to kill them, and I can assure you they will not be expecting a frontal assault. Not after I turned tail and ran back there." He finished speaking and let go of her arm. She had teared up once again, but soon enough a look of resolution came over her face. She nodded once. "Okay, I'll take you, but that's it. I'm not going back into that place again. It was horrible," she said as she fought back more sobs. Crow reached over and cupped her cheek in his hand and looked her in the eye. He smiled at her as he spoke. "Don't worry. I wouldn't ask you to go back inside. It's far too dangerous. Just show me where they are, and I'll handle the rest." She had begun to wrap her fingers around his, and he drew back. He had not let a woman touch him since Drusilla. She had a strange, hurt look on her face. "I'm sorry. I just can't go down that road. Besides, you're traumatized and vulnerable. Let's just go. They will not be expecting an attack so soon. He stood and pulled his coat on again. Victoria looked confused. Why didn't you go back tonight? Please, mister. I can't. Not so soon, she said as she pulled on his arm. He grabbed her and stood her up, looking into her eyes. We have to. I won't risk losing an hour. These witches are dangerous. They're probably already scrying for your location. They have ways to see without the limitations of space. We're already running out of time here. Move, he said as he pulled her toward the door. Once in the car, he pulled his pocket knife and cut his thumb. The blood welled from the tiny incision. He used it to draw a small symbol on her forehead, then one on his own. This will keep us hidden from them, at least for a while. Don't wipe it off, he said as he started the car and slammed the shifter into reverse. He let out the clutch and the car lurched backward. When they had cleared this parking space, he revved the engine and shoved the shifter into first and dumped the clutch. They left the Murphy with the sound of screeching tires, the Nova barreling into the night. 10 minutes later, they had reached Rose Drive. As she called a halt, Crow was looking at a house on the left side of the street. It was old and big, with a high stone wall surrounding it, which was locked off by a sinister-looking wrought iron gate. He felt sure this would be the place, but the girl was pointing to the other side of the road. The place she was pointing to was no less large than the other house, a small mansion really, but without a wall of any kind. He parked the Nova and killed the engine, looking once more at the quiet old house behind the wall. Something about it called to him, but he didn't have time to consider it right now. He shut it from his mind and turned to the task at hand. There, that's it, the girl said. They had me in the basement, all sorts of weird symbols on the walls and some kind of table in the middle of the floor. She was wrapping her arms around her knees in the seat, like she was trying to hide from the place. Crow checked his weapons and gear. All was ready. Now just the killing would remain. All right, stay here, no matter what you see or hear. If I do not come back out in an hour, start the car and get the hell out of here. Go as far as you can, get and hide. Don't look back, you understand? He was looking at her intently. She nodded and he climbed out of the old Nova. He took the first step toward the house and, taking his own advice, did not spare a look back. He moved fast, his agility as sharp as it ever was. He was a dark ghost crossing the yard. He reached the side of the house without incident and began to search for a way inside. All the windows were dark as he made a circuit of the grounds, and he finally decided on a ground floor window on the back side. From what he could see, it led to a drawing room, and after 10 minutes of careful surveillance, he saw no activity within. He pulled the small glass cutter from his pack and soon had a hole in the window, large enough to admit his arm. He reached in and unlocked the old window, which swung open on its hinges like a door. He climbed inside silently and closed the window behind him. He laid down a salt line across the sill, securing his escape route. He then went to the door and cracked it open. No movement or light in the hall. He stepped out and made his way to the front door. It was locked, of course. He unlatched the bolt and unlocked the handle. Turning from this, he made his way up the stairs. He found libraries, bedrooms, bathrooms, everything one would expect in a house such as this. He found no witches, however. If they were here, they would have to be in the basement. Good. He found another staircase on the back side of the house and made his way down from there. He worked his way back to the main room and was about to try the door he assumed led to the basement. There was a flickering light coming from underneath the door, and he was more sure than ever they would be there. As he was reaching for the handle, he heard a floorboard creak behind him. He whirled around, a knife in hand, when he recognized Victoria standing behind him. He threw up his hand in frustration. What the fuck are you doing? I told you to wait in the car, he whispered fiercely to her. She winced at his voice, and a hurt expression came over her face. It was plain, even in the darkness. I was worried. I didn't want to bail without you. I'm sorry. Let's just go, okay? She whispered. Crow shook his head. I can't. Come on, let's get you out of here. They're downstairs. I was about to go in. Get back to the car so I can work, he said, as he turned to walk to the main doors. She was walking behind him. He could hear her soft steps. He reached for the handle as he felt something like a tiny prick on his neck, and a warm, flushing sensation washed into his veins. He clapped his hand over the area as he turned. Victoria was standing behind him, holding a syringe, smiling at him. The last thing he saw as the darkness took him was the other women, walking up behind her out of the open door, the flickering light of fire illuminating them from the open basement. Crow was aware of the sensation of cold, hard stone under his skin. He could feel it touching the entire backside of his body. His chest, face, crotch, and legs were being kissed by the cold air of the room. As his eyes fluttered open, the light of several torches made him wince. He looked around and saw that he was in a basement room. The walls were of dark stone, coated here and there with mitre and mold. The clear sections covered with sigils and wards. He tried to move, but found himself secured to the stones by thick leather straps. When he looked straight up to the ceiling, he saw a mirror had been affixed there. He saw himself reflected there, strapped to an altar. His chest, arms, and legs were securely fastened in place. He could see his manhood in the reflection. He was completely nude. He heard a door open and 6 women walked into the room, all wearing black hooded robes. As 5 of them took their places at the points of the pinnacle, which was painted on the floor, the 6th approached him. She drew back her hood, revealing herself to be Sasha. She smiled at him as she spoke. "Mr. Crow, I'm so glad to see you are finally awake. You are our guest of honor tonight, witch hunter," she said. The others then pulled back their hoods, revealing their faces. One was Victoria. She offered him a sinister smile, the look of one who has won a great victory. "Oh, Nathan, I'm so sorry I had to deceive you, but you were simply too dangerous to take by force. You see, we've been watching you for a long, long time. In 300 years there was never a hunter as skilled and dedicated as you. It's so sad this very dedication is to be the reason for your undoing," she said as she blew him a kiss. Crow struggled against his bonds, seething. "You fucking bitch, what the hell are you going to do with me?" Crow screamed at her. Victoria just smiled along with the others. It was Sasha who answered him. "Why, we are going to summon our god, Mr. Crow. Didn't Victoria tell you? Bakaberaha has slumbered for far too long. We've been waiting for over 300 years for just the right man to fill this table. Not just any blood sacrifice will do, Crow. We need the blood of a true crusader." "You are our man, Nathan," she said as she traced a finger along his bicep, as one might do to their lover. She leaned down and kissed him on the lips, her hand moving toward his manhood. He struggled and tried to bite at her, but she had drawn back as quickly as a snake. "You're mad, all of you. If you summon that thing, it will destroy everything, probably starting with you. How fucking stupid can you witches be?" He was screaming again, the cords in his neck standing out as the blood flushed his face. Spittle was flying from his lips and his eyes were blazing in his tanned face. Sasha and the others merely laughed at him. "You are the fool, witch hunter. This ritual is not just to summon Bakaberaha, it is to bind him to us. We will use his might to crush the rest of your cult and usher in the return of the old ways. Witches will once again be the terror in the darkness, and no man will ever find the courage to hunt us in this world or any other." Sasha threw her head back, and they all shouted praise to their dark god in unison. "You can't do this! You have no hope of controlling that thing!" He was begging now, trying any way he could to reason with them. Fear was filling him, taking over his senses. He knew what that god was, and he knew the consequences of its release. Tears began to flow from his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I failed you," he whispered. Sasha cooed at him and stroked his cheek. "None of that, handsome. You're going to be remembered as a hero to all witches after tonight. Speaking of, it's time," she said as she slid off her robes. The others followed suit. They were all standing there nude, sigils painted in blood on their bodies. They all moved to the altar, forming a ring around him. He struggled and cursed, but they paid him no mind. Sasha brought forth a golden chalice. Faces of demons, imps, and other creatures worked into the sides. She picked up the dagger that had been laid beside his head, and they each in turn cut their left palm and bled into the chalice. Sasha spoke some incantation, and a cold breeze blew through the basement. She smiled as the others returned to their places at the edge of the circle and began to chant. Sasha looked down at Crow. "You're actually going to enjoy the greater part of this, Hunter. You see, this involves my speciality. Sex magic," she said to him as she leaned down and licked the side of his face. She dipped her hand into the blood and it came out red and slick. She reached down and began to work his manhood with her hand, and he could see it in the mirror. The blood was running down onto his stomach and spilling over his hips onto the altar. He felt his body betray him as he became aroused. When that happened, she drank from the chalice, holding the blood in her mouth. His stomach turned as she lowered her head and began to bob up and down his erect member. He thrashed about, trying to fight, even as moans of involuntary pleasure escaped his lips. The blood flowed all over him as she worked faster and faster. The other women swayed and chanted furiously and began to pleasure themselves. Sasha then stopped and looked up at him. She had blood running out of her mouth and over her chin down onto her breast. She licked some of it off his stomach and smiled. "Now is the time, Crusader. Now you shall betray yourself, your cause, and give me what I want," she said as she climbed onto the altar. She straddled him as he screamed and thrashed. and the women on the edges of the circle chanted in almost unintelligible further. She moaned as she slid down onto him, her hands pressing onto his chest as she rode. The dagger in her right hand was cold against his flesh, and her hot wetness enveloped him over and over again. He screamed for her to stop, even as he panted with pleasure. She only smiled more and more and took up the chant with the others. He could see the blood running down her body, which was beautiful to him even in this moment. He could feel it coming, even as he tried to fight it. She could too, for she raised the dagger high over him as she worked her hips. Baka Beraha, we call you. We defile this crusader and offer you his blood and life in this moment of his betrayal. Come to us. Be bound to our will as his seed binds to me. Let our child be the living covenant which brings us together. He had thought he had felt true horror up until now, but at that moment it flooded him completely. At the same instant he felt himself betray everything as his orgasm took him over. He emptied his seed even into the witch, even as she plunged a dagger into his heart. She looked down at him, smiling, her own orgasm shaking her as she stabbed. He felt the earth begin to shake, and as his head lolled to the side, he saw the floor split open. A red light flooded the room, and a horrid stench filled the air. Smoke rose from the fissure, and a hellish reptilian screech came from below. The last things Crow saw as he bled out was a large, scaly hand emerge from the crack, and Sasha, the mother of his child, smiling down at him. The darkness and horror washed over him, dragging him down into the cold, waiting hands of death. The end.